Well, it'll be all right. Okay. Now, we said the presidency, the executive branch has a lot of people working for it. Remember, about how many people are working to enforce the law in this country? A lot. Well, give me a ballpark guess. 2 million. 2 million people are working to enforce the law. All right. And the president can only do so much by himself. He's the commander in chief, though. He has control of the armed forces. We mentioned that. I need to put up something for the Space Force because I don't want to leave them out because technically now they're part of the armed forces. Ah, correct. The Guardians of the Galaxy. We also mentioned that the president can grant pardons, which is a literal get out of jail free card. Most famously, Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for any crimes he might have committed while being president. That literally was a blanket pardon for his whole term in office. It's like everything Richard Nixon might have done as president, got a whole pardon for. Yes. As long as it's not in case of impeachment, then yes, presidents can pardon themselves and anybody else. Donald Trump had to be talked out of pardoning his family in the last week in office. And his advisors were like, look, that really won't look good, and it's going to make everybody in the family look guilty. Oof. Because he doesn't want them touched at all. Now, that aside, is that usually presidential pardons are not given out to people who are violent criminals or anything like that, but pardoning power is unchecked. Right? The like once you like if Katie Losh were in jail for armed robbery and I wanted to pardon her as president, once I pardon her, there's no undoing it. Okay, it's done, and that's that. The only thing you could do to a president is theoretically impeach them for abuse of power. But what have we seen about impeachment in the last year? It does not as effective as we'd like it to be. And I'm not saying it was a slam dunk case against Donald Trump, but it was about as close as you could get. Okay? President also has the ability to negotiate treaties. Treaties are binding agreements with other nations. We mentioned those. And the problem with treaties is that you have to get the Senate's confirmation. They have to put their stamp of approval on it. To get around that, presidents negotiate what they call executive agreements. That's more like a handshake agreement. The problem with an executive agreement, you don't need Senate approval for it, but it's not binding, meaning the next president can just toss it out and say, I'm not doing that. Right? Obama, in his last year in office, negotiated an executive agreement with Iran where they would give up pursuing nuclear weapons, and in exchange, we would lift economic sanctions and provide them with some aid. All right? And because the Senate never ratified it, it wasn't a treaty, an official treaty. What did Trump do when he came into office? I mean, I wouldn't say violated. He just said, we're not going to go by that agreement anymore. And he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords as well. All right, which were things that were more executive agreements and less treaties. Now, we want to mention that the president also, in the Constitution, has a responsibility to give a report from time to time about the State of the Union. Okay? The president has to give a report on the State of the Union. We've come to interpret that as that the president gives a report every year about the State of the Union. Here's a, for instance, what you do is the president will have a joint session of Congress meet and listen to him, and you have the Supreme Court justices there, and you see behind Obama at the time, former Vice President Joe Biden, now President, former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, and the State of the Union, that particular address, it has a couple of things about it that are significant. Okay. Most importantly, this is where the president sets his agenda for the next year. He lays out what his policy goals are going to be. He says, here's what I think we should be focusing on as a country. For example, if Joe Biden gave a State of the Union address today, what do you think would be at the top of his list in terms of his priorities for the next year? Something about COVID. What would obviously be one thing about COVID that he wants to see Congress get done immediately? Relief bill, okay? And a big relief bill, $1.9 trillion worth. Not only that, but what else does he have to supervise, the president have to supervise and want to talk about other than just COVID relief? What's the biggest logistics problem? Maybe the number, you want to talk about the number of cases going down, but how do we get those cases down? taking precautions and also talking about vaccinations. All right, talking about the various things that we need to do. And by the way, Joe Biden has mentioned that by this summer, and he made it's kind of a bold step. He said we're going to have enough vaccines for everybody in the country who wants one, which is a pretty big deal. Okay. By the way, if he doesn't deliver on that promise, if it doesn't happen, he has to take the blame for that. Okay. Even if it's not his fault. Even if something happens, like let's say Pfizer's factory blows up and they're not able to deliver as many vaccines, Joe Biden is still going to take heat for that because you promised, right? That's the danger in making promises like that. What else would be in Joe Biden's, perhaps his State of the Union address? What does he want to accomplish in the next year? What would a Democratic liberal president hope for? What is it? Raising minimum wage. What else is something that like left-wing liberal people want to see enacted? Perhaps something protecting what they wouldn't say abortion laws, but a woman's right to choose. What is it? Something to fix health care. All right. So you're getting all the topics there. Part of what you're doing in that State of the Union is laying out your agenda because it's an opportunity to speak directly to the people. Look, when the president's on, especially when you get both houses of Congress there, it's on all the TV stations. And look, you guys are lucky. Back in my day when the president was on, there's only channels 2 through 13, right? And if he was on, you were screwed. Yes, I know. Channels 2 through 13. God, it was terrible. All right. So if the president was on, that's what everybody's watching. You had no choice. All right. Now you guys are like, I think I'll watch some Netflix. All right. Now, that aside, though, there's another reason for the State of the Union address. It's not just the president laying out his agenda, but it's also the president kind of being a cheerleader, okay, pumping up the country. Like, oh, what's the state or the condition of our union? What does the president say the State of the Union always is? Do you always say the union's pretty weak right now? Does anybody ever get up there and say that? No, because you don't want people to think that. They'll think you're a crappy leader. What do you say about the union? It's strong. Our union is strong. You say something about the fact that the union is strong and things are looking up. Prosperity is right around the corner. Landon Paul is going to promise a vaccine in every arm and a chicken in every pot. All right. By the way, somebody did once promise a chicken in every pot. Okay. Herbert Hoover. It turned out okay for the first few years because everybody loves chicken. Okay. That's why chicken. Now, the State of the Union address is extremely important to the president because it's also an opportunity where you get both parties together and you can try to build some unity. But it doesn't work out all that well. The cheerleading is always fun. For example, when Obama's giving the State of the Union and he says something that Democrats like, what do they all do? They stand up and clap, applause. And of course, when that happens, what are the Republicans doing? They just sit there stone faced. And the reverse was true when Trump was president. Yes. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that. Every now and again, there's something like normally if you're a member of Congress, you kind of sit there and you just deal with it. But there's always some shenanigans there. There's always, every once in a while. For example, a few years ago when Obama was giving a speech, he made a statement, something about health insurance, and a congressman from South Carolina yells out, "You lie!" And everybody's like, oh, it's totally aghast. Last year, Nancy Pelosi, she's Speaker of the House, so she was sitting directly behind Donald Trump, and she always gets, and everybody, these people get an advanced copy of the president's speech. Well, she was so disgusted with the president's speech, she stands up afterwards and just rips it in half. All right, which is a little on the childish side. Okay, a little, but she was clearly not a happy camper. Okay, so you have the president there, and sometimes we get some shenanigans too. But after the State of the Union's over, the opposing party, the party not the president's, they always pick somebody to give a rebuttal and say, here's why the president's wrong, here's what we should prioritize, and the union's not as strong as the president wants us to think. Okay? It's a good place for us to stop. It's about time to go. Remember, tomorrow, 2-hour early release.